today I want to talk to you. I want to, first of all, thank Angelica and Mitch for the invitation, and Kelly for putting this together to be able to present for you today about the benefits of neurofeedback, biofeedback, and brain mapping for trauma and PTSD. So the objective is to briefly present to you the technological benefits of implementing these interventions for your clients who struggle with trauma and or PTSD, and why these technological interventions are an excellent option for you, not only from the technological perspective, but how they can help you understand your clients more profoundly and more efficiently, and to be able to provide more robust interventions that can go alongside with your with the tools that you already use. And therefore that means that if you're a clinician who uses psychotherapy, talk therapy, or you use hypnosis, or you use EMDR or brain spotting, or a combination of these interventions, you can certainly bring along the brain mapping piece, the biofeedback piece, and the neurofeedback piece to the equation to, again, further understand, more profoundly understand your clients and be able to help with the healing process. And the first thing that I always ask when I do these talks is, why do we need to study trauma? Well, the reason we need to study trauma is very simple, because it's inherent to the human species. Trauma is something that's happened to most people. And some of us, I have certainly experienced several traumatic experiences throughout my life. And some of you may have done the same. And therefore, you take your own experiences into the healing paradigms that you want to apply to help the people, and learn how to treat it, how to study its intricacies, and then how to use the technology to use it. And I always also like to talk about this study. Some of you may be very well familiar with the Kaiser Permanente and the CDC study back in the 1990s, mid-1990s. And this study is really important because it's the first study of its kind that created or made evident the association between trauma, mental illness, and physical illness. So for the first time, we're treating trauma and mental illness and physical illness not as separate entities, but as a compound, if you will, as a combination of an experience that creates a physical response and a mental response. And what's interesting about this study is you can find it online. It's open access, and you can carefully read the statistics. They have statistics on several nationalities and ethnicities, sexual orientations, religious backgrounds. What it shows is that trauma is inherent to people, and it doesn't discriminate. Trauma will impact you regardless of where you come from, how old you are, what your background is, what your religious beliefs are, whether you're spiritual or religious or not. Trauma will certainly have an impact in your mental health and your physical health. And we need to understand why and how this happens. Now, the study took a look at some specific dimensions, which are abuse, one of them being abuse. And abuse incorporates the emotional aspect, the physical aspect, and the sexual aspect. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here describing them, because you can read them in detail if you find a study. But it's just to understand how trauma interacts with the client and how it manifests when they come to see you in the office. When the trauma client shows up for the first time, you interview them, you talk to them, or you talk to them on the phone, you talk to them via Zoom, and then you have an idea of what this looks like. So they also looked at household challenges, and this is something that we deal on a day-to-day basis, whether we do neurofeedback or not. We have trauma clients who come to the office for neurofeedback. We do some sessions, but they go back to the same toxic environment. They go back to the same dysfunctional family. They go back to the same abusive environment, whether it's in a family setting, whether it's in an adoption setting, in a shelter setting, whatever the setting is. Sometimes we send the client back. And what we work then is to teach that brain and that client more resilience so that they can cope with this environment. If they cannot immediately or in the long term remove themselves from these traumatic environments, how do they cope so that they can fare better in the environment? And that's certainly something we can use and apply and teach the brain and the client with this technology. We can further strengthen their coping strategies. And also, of course, there is neglect. A large number of trauma clients have suffered from neglect, from parents who have been traumatized themselves, who have personality disorders, who have been abandoned. Neglect is one of the main components of the trauma response. And again, we work with the neurophysiological, the psychophysiological consequences, and our goal is to help these clients self-regulate. Now, this pyramid is really important because that's, according to the study and according to many trauma specialists and experts, is how the sequence of trauma works for the client. And it all starts with a traumatic event, with some social conditions, and then you have some disrupted neurodevelopment. Now, what's important to understand here is that a large percentage of your clients, 90% or more of your clients, will come to see you not when the event has taken place, but after the disruption in that neurodevelopmental trajectory has occurred, when there's a dysregulation of the system. And they will come when they're already experiencing the cognitive impairment, the mental impairment, the emotional impairment, and they will come when they're already adopting risky behaviors. They're addicted, they're promiscuous, they are hanging out with the wrong crowd, and obviously they will come to see when they're hurting, when there's some medical or mental or a combination of both, a manifestation of these things. I have migraine headaches, I have autoimmune disorder, I have depression, I'm suicidal. That's when the client will come to see you. Clients seldom come when the event has taken place or in the short term after the event has taken place. They come here when they're highly dysregulated. And that's why we can use these technologies. We can use the brain mapping to look at the brain and understand the case in more detail. And then we can use interventions like biofeedback and neurofeedback to help these people self-regulate more efficiently. Now, again, because the disruption is really high when they come see you. In my experience, I work with functional medicine practitioners quite frequently. And one of the types of clients that they refer the most to me are females who've been victims of sexual assault, sexual abuse. These females have an invariable history of autoimmune conditions. They have different autoimmune presentations. And what the functional medicine doctors tell me is, we've done everything we can from the medical perspective. We've tried supplements, we've tried everything that we can think of, and they're not getting better. Now we think this is more of a psychological, emotional issue. So can you please do a brain map and work with them? And I've worked with several females with neurofeedback, with biofeedback. And in the course of 10 to 15 sessions, a lot of these ladies report very significant changes. I had a lady who was sexually assaulted 3 different times in her teenage years. And she was highly triggered because she had to walk by, on her way to work, she had to walk by a building where one of the assaults took place, and that would trigger her and create panic attacks. And then sometime after the 10th session, she comes to me and says, you know, today I had to walk by that building again, and I didn't get triggered. I knew what happened, but my body reacted as if nothing had happened. And that was the significant breaking point for her. Some other women will report that since the assault, they're not sexually attracted to men. And after a few sessions, they report feeling sexually attracted to men again. So we see this quite significant impact, a positive impact in the emotion, in the cognition, in the way it manifests in the body and the mind. And of course, the life trajectory for these clients becomes more positive. So, of course, this is a list of a lot of the consequences, the byproducts of being traumatized. And these are some of the conditions that we can help rearrange, that we can help self-regulate, that we can mitigate with tools like brain mapping, neurofeedback, and biofeedback. because we can clearly see what's going on and we can personalize the intervention. This is not a one-size-fits-all approach. This is personalized behavioral medicine, behavioral psychology. This is a personalized technological intervention that is evidence-based and is non-invasive. So the other interesting aspect is that trauma plays out differently. The reactivity for people is different. It varies widely. Some people will be very angry. Some people will be more depressed. Some people will be relatively calm. And we need to understand why this happens. So there are a series of factors that you can determine from an observational perspective, but you can also see in terms of brainwave patterns when you record the brain map. So when you record the brain map, you can correlate these brainwave patterns, these signatures in the individual's brain activity. You can correlate them to the different components of trauma response. And it's important to understand this because it helps you have a prognosis for the individual, how successful you think you can be in terms of your clinical outcomes, and then you can provide the client with a realistic framework. And the event itself, how long did the trauma take place or how long it's been taking place? It's not the same working with an individual who's been removed from this environment than working with an individual who will be exposed to this constantly in a war zone, in an abusive home, in an abusive setting, in a dysregulated society. So working with people in the Ukraine, working with people in Gaza, working with people in war zones is not in areas with natural disasters. It's not the same as working with somebody who had the trauma a few years ago and is now removed from the event itself. We also need to understand the context of the person. And this is very important because in reality, as much as we can help and as much as we want to help, we are not going to be successful 100% of the time. We can have a high success rate between 80% to 95%, and that's better than nothing. But in reality, sometimes the context of the person's life will not allow us to do proper work. We will push as hard as we can and we'll work as hard as we can, but the reality is the environment is not allowing for the change. It's not permitting the change. And that's very important to understand as well. The physical characteristics of the individual. Is this an individual who's eating well, who's sleeping well, who is exercising, who's involved in fitness? Self-care is everything when it comes to healing. Whether you do neurofeedback, whether you do psychotherapy, whether you do brain spotting or EMDR, it doesn't matter what type of intervention you're using. You need to involve the client in positive life change, responsible life change, and self-care. Now, the interesting thing is that many clients will try to make those life changes, but it's very difficult for them. And the reason why it's difficult is because they're neurophysiologically and psychophysiologically dysregulated. That means their brain is wired in a way that is not permitting them to develop the discipline. Once you understand that brain and once you train that brain, the changes start taking place. Why? Because people are better self-regulated. They're not as triggered. They're not as anxious. They're not having the nightmares anymore. They're not having the panic attacks anymore. So that brings, first and foremost, it will bring an internal change in terms of the plasticity and the connectivity, of course. Secondly, it will bring that change in the self-esteem and the self-confidence. If you're no longer triggered, even though you're seeing your assailant, if you feel self-confident, if you feel empowered, then you can bring about that change. And one of the ways we can achieve that is through the technology. So we can also enhance the person's learned capabilities. We can enhance their self-confidence, what they can actually do to get better. When a trauma client comes to see us, one of the main characteristics is that they don't have that confidence. They lack that self-confidence. But as the brain changes and as they see that they can move forward, then the process starts growing and growing, and they get more confident and more confident. And we can evidence this from session to session, from session 1 to session 20, in between sessions, within sessions. So we can actually show them the changes they're experiencing within the same session or within a number of sessions, and that's very powerful. So we can also enhance then their external and internal perception of the trauma. Okay, we can shift that paradigm for them, or we can rather teach them. Now, with neurofeedback, biofeedback, and brain mapping, you can work with the 4 components of the trauma response. Every client that you see, especially they have trauma experience, if they have a trauma history, will present with at least one of these 4 components. Normally, people present with all 4, but one tends to be the more salient for them. And you can correlate brainwave patterns to these components, and that helps you plan your intervention more optimally. Some clients will present with hyperarousal, and they will have a lot of beta brainwaves in their EEG, and you will see a lot of red spots in the qEEG in the brain maps because they have hyperactivated areas, their limbic system, their insula, their frontal cortex, and they're very hyperaroused, quite hyperactive, quite aggressive, or anxious all the time. Then you will have the clients who are constricted. They're suppressing their emotion, and there's brainwave patterns that you can detect. Not only the brainwave pattern, but the specific brain region or regions where this takes place. You can also pick up brainwave patterns for dissociation. If dissociation is the driving force behind your client's trauma response, then we can work with that as well. And one of the most common ones is the immobility and helplessness. Clients will come to me all the time and tell me, you're literally my last hope. You're the light at the end of the tunnel. I've tried everything that I can. Nothing is working for me. So I'm going to give this a shot, and let's see if it works. And thankfully, for most people, it does. Okay, because we can see the problem. We can see where specifically the problem is in the brain and the body, and then we can integrate different interventions to help out. So we can pick up the physiological responses from the hyperarousal if we do a stress profile. We can connect sensors in a non-invasive way and pick up heart rate. We can pick up muscle tension. We can pick up the sweating of the palm of the hands, whether their peripheral temperature drops. And all of these are good indicators of how the client is responding physiologically to physical stress and psychological stress in response to trauma. So we can actually visualize that. And we can visualize the physiological reactions for hyperarousal, for suppression. Hyperarousal, we have some specific physiological responses. The ones for suppression are going to be different, but we can pick them up. We can detect them. We can understand them. Same for dissociation and same for helplessness. Okay? And again, people respond in different ways. So what I'm doing is working within the individual for the individual. Okay, I'm not comparing them to the rest of the population. I'm working with their specific needs and their specific objectives. So all of this has to do with the orienting response. Once the client has become traumatized because they have one or more unfortunate experiences, they will orient, they will navigate towards the trauma in a very specific way. And that is physiologically, behaviorally, emotionally. So now what we do is understand how that's happening neurophysiologically, psychophysiologically, electrophysiologically. We can show it to the client and then help them out. And to do that, we use psychophysiological signals. So what we can look at is the heart rate, how the heart rate speeds up or slows down in response to trauma. Skin conductance, the sweating of the palm of the hands. Is the hand really clammy and sweaty, or is it dry? What does it mean? Are they dissociating? Are they going into a panic attack? The same for the temperature. We can look at their blood volume pulse, their respiratory rate, and also EEG activity. We can do it individually, or we can do it simultaneously. We can look at all these variables at the same time, or if we choose, we can look at them individually. for the assessment and the intervention, which means for the assessment, we can look at them individually or simultaneously. And for the intervention, we can also work with them in tandem, or we can work with them individually. And that's essentially decided on a case-to-case basis. The important thing is that the technology allows this flexibility. And what we end up doing is looking at the client from a physiological perspective, which is their physical responses. Again, their muscle tension, their skin conductance, their heart rate variability, their breathing speed, their breathing pace, and from the cognitive perspective or the emotional component. And we integrate those to help them overcome and empower them. So we work with the fear, we work with the anxiety, we work with the worry, and we work with your physiological responses. And we teach the client how to self-regulate, how to manage them efficiently, and how to move on and empower them to realize that they can have a healthy, productive, and happy life. One of the strategies is heart rate variability, and heart rate variability specifically talks or works with the heart-brain connection. So when we work with the heart indirectly, sometimes directly, we're working with the brain. Anytime we enhance heart activity, we're enhancing brain activity. Okay, and that's very powerful. Just by enhancing the functioning of your cardiovascular system, you're enhancing and promoting good, healthy brain activity. Okay, let's talk about some case studies. So this is a male client that I saw a few years ago who worked in construction, and he witnessed a co-worker experience a very dramatic accident. The co-worker survived, but was in the hospital for a very long time, and he witnessed everything. So he experienced the trauma response by being a witness to the trauma, not being the direct recipient. And one of the things we see in the EEG, in the brain activity, is new brainwaves. New brainwaves usually correlate with dissociation. This is a client who, after the witnessing this event, started dissociating quite frequently, and it was affecting his relationship with his wife, his relationship with his children, with his co-workers, with his colleagues at work. So what I decided to do was to look at the brain, record a baseline EEG, and then do some diaphragmatic breathing with him. So I found his resonant frequency, which is his ideal breathing rate. And once I found his ideal breathing rate, I started to teach him to breathe in a specific way with this breathing rate and see if there are changes in the brain. And that's what we see here. What we see down here is the EEG, and in the blue box, you see the mu activity. So this is the mu brain waves, more prevalent on the left sensory motor cortex. Okay, this is the green spot here is a graphic representation of what we see here in the EEG. Now, I'm also recording the EKG, which is what you see at the bottom of the page. We're recording brain activity and heart activity at the same time. I'm recording, we can see the mu quite synchronous, quite active, which means he's activating the dissociation. And after a few seconds or a couple of minutes of doing the resonant coherent breathing, look at what happens to the mu. It starts to desynchronize. So right there and then, we're getting live, real-time evidence of the power of breath work influencing brain activity. And what that means is that he's starting to break the dissociation. We're starting to break the pattern. So he was going into dissociation because he's overwhelmed. And as he learns to self-regulate, his brain starts learning that he no longer needs to do that. And over a number of sessions, after repeating this for a few sessions, then we can restructure connectivity in the brain, and he's going to learn this new healthy pattern. Every time he feels overwhelmed, he's not going to go into the dissociation. He's not going to sustain the dissociation any longer. He's going to now be able to break from this dissociation, and now he's going to be able to self-regulate without needing to detach himself. So with the technology, We can see this in real time. We can show it to the client, and we can track progress. Now, we can also use techniques like temperature training and GSR, galvanic skin response, or skin conductance training, where essentially what we're doing is teaching people to self-regulate by monitoring their sweat response or the temperature at the fingertip. So we're essentially teaching the client how to control or manage their sweat glands and the innervations to the brain, or also their the blood flow to the hand or away from the hand, to help them self-regulate. So essentially, we're teaching them how to efficiently manage their sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. And this has incredible results for a variety of clients. And since we're talking about trauma, it has incredible results for trauma. Okay, so we can work with this to help mitigate the symptoms and help and empower the client. Now, if you use this in combination with psychotherapy or neuromodulation, it's even more powerful. Now, neurofeedback is training the brain directly. And what we do is place sensors on the brain and train brain regions. We teach people to make more of certain brain waves, less of certain brain waves. And through this process, people learn to rewire the brain. We're teaching them neuroplasticity. We take a brain that's dysregulated, is wired in a specific way, and we train to rewire it. So the faulty networks start withering away, and we're creating new pathways. And these new pathways are going to permit that the healthier behavior is sustained over time. So we work in a brain-computer interface in which the client has some sensors on the scalp and on the earlobes. As the clinician, we're looking at a specific screen that's showing us the brain activity, and then the client will have a different display on a second screen. It could be a movie, it could be a video game, but the movie and the video game are directly connected to the screen that the clinician is monitoring. We can teach people to rewire the brainwave activity by controlling a movie. The setup is very simple. If the client is getting their brain to work efficiently, the movie keeps playing. The moment the brain gets dysregulated again, the movie will stop playing, the screen will go dark, the movie will shrink. You can set up this the feedback options. But essentially, we're teaching the client to teach the brain to keep the movie playing. But it's not happening unless the brain does what we require it to do. So as an example, if the client has a lot of beta brain waves that are causing a lot of anxiety, we're going to teach them to reduce the amplitude of these beta brainwaves to reduce the anxiety. When the client is watching the movie and they're self-regulating, the movie will play. The moment they start getting into that beta state, the movie will stop, a sound will go off, the screen will get dark, and that's the message that the brain gets to then learn to self-regulate. And it's through repetition and repetition and more repetition that the brain learns to do this. It's just learning a skill like any other. Learning a new language, learning to play an instrument, learning a sport. The more I repeat, the more frequently I do it, the more efficiently I'm going to learn it. And this is fun and engaging for the client, is evidence-based, and is non-invasive. Nothing is going into the brain. The electrodes are measuring the information, it's sent to an amplifier, the amplifier puts it on the screen, and then we do the work. Oh, let's look at a case study looking at what we did with neurofeedback and brain mapping. This is a male client who had a traumatic experience. It was a combination of neglect and abuse from the mother. And the result was that on T4, on the right temporal lobe, we found elevated alpha brain waves. And we found in the occipital regions of the brain, we found lambda waves. Okay, this is the eyes open recording. We can do eyes open and eyes closed recording, but I want to show you what we did with the eyes open recording. So the alpha frequency here is affecting a region of the brain called the insula. And his most salient behavioral response was what? Anger. People with overactivation of the insula generally show extreme anger, bouts of rage, as one of the behavioral byproducts of the trauma response. But we know that because we looked at the EEG. So after training him for 13 sessions, we decided to, at his request, to map him again. I normally do the training for 20 sessions before I remap, before I do another brain map. But in this case, what we did was, at his request, do it at 13 sessions. He said, I'm feeling some changes. I want to see if they're showing in the brain. Can we do a brain map? Sure, let's do it. So what he reported was feeling less reactive, more calm, less depressed. So this is, of course, quite broad, but that's what was reported. And the spouse, the wife, reported there was a noticeable reduction in verbal abuse. One of his main concerns was that when he was getting triggered, he would be verbally abusive to his wife. Not physically violent, he would never touch her, but he would insult her, berate, yelled at her. And this was damaging the marriage. So he reported, and the wife reported, that there was a quite significant reduction in his reactivity. He was more under control. This is the raw EEG, the baseline raw EEG for the eyes open, okay? And this is the T4 region, so the right temporal lobe. This is the high amplitude persistent alpha rhythmicity that we were talking about. And this pointy waves that you see, O1 and O2 pointing to the occipital lobes, is the lambda waves. That's his hyperreactivity. And lambda waves in somebody with trauma normally typically point or correlate to a PTSD diagnosis. If you notice to the right, after 13 sessions, look at how more stable his EEG looks. Not only the right temporal lobe, but also there's a significant reduction in the lambda waves. And that's what correlates to his improvements. More calm, less reactive, less depressed. So this is after 13 sessions, which means we were doing with him 2 sessions per week. So this is after 6 weeks of training the brain. This is very remarkable because he had been doing years and years of therapy with some progress. But now that we're regulating his brain, now that we're self-regulating his neurophysiology, his psychotherapy is going to be even more successful. He's going to navigate through the psychotherapy more efficiently because now his brain is adapted to the point he can understand the skill that he learns in psychotherapy and to apply the skill that he learns in psychotherapy. So this is the qEEG portion. This is the raw EEG, and this is the visual description of that. This is his right temporal lobe, and this is the alpha wave. The red spot here shows that there's a excess in that amplitude. It means that his brain does not need that much alpha there. And then after 13 sessions, the red is gone. That means that that region of the brain is better wired. His self-regulation is more efficient. Okay, and we have the concrete and tangible evidence. But the important thing here is we were able to work with him because we saw where the problem was. We're not guessing. We're not eeny, meeny, miny, moing the symptoms. We know where it's happening and how it's happening. Okay, so this eliminates guessing, and this gives us a roadmap to work with the client that it's quite clear. So this is the before and after, and this is the before and after. This is 13 sessions, mind you. I worked with him for a total of 60 sessions, and then he is today very happy. He's a mental health counselor. He had to stop working as a mental health counselor here in Singapore because of his mental health issues. He's back to working as a mental health counselor. The marriage has been saved, very happy. He's come to terms with the abandonment from the mother. The mother has dementia now, advanced dementia. So he's come to terms with the fact that she is now not going to be able to apologize, and he's not going to recover that relationship because of the mother's medical condition. But we could evidence it. Now, good news for us, FDA now has endorsed and approved neurofeedback for PTSD. So one of the advantages that we have now is that we have the support or the clearance or the endorsement from the FDA. And this is quite significant because now we can do more solid research to strengthen this, and to obviously be able to provide the clients with more credibility in our work, and credibility in that these interventions do work. If you're interested in learning these interventions, these are some of the dates. You can contact Kelly Philly at Successful Practitioner. So the website is successful-practitioner.com, and his email is kelly@successfulpractitioner.com. You can schedule a 25 free minute consultation with him. He will be happy to help you out and guide you in the process when it comes to education and trainings. These are some of the upcoming trainings that we have with yours truly and some other colleagues. Manuel Dom Halter, Dr. Halter is one of another instructors who sometimes co-teaches these classes with me. But we're going to have a series of classes in San Antonio, Texas. You can opt for a hybrid mode, which means you can take some of the hours for the class online, and then you can travel to San Antonio for a couple of days and do the face-to-face portion there. And that's going to be for September 19 and 20. We're going to have the neurofeedback certificate course, which you previously take online. The qEEg class, the brain mapping, will be September 21st through the 24th. And I also teach an artifacting and report writing course and an advanced EEG interpretation course, which means once you have taken your brain mapping basic class, you can stay for an additional 2 days and spend a whole day with me, learning how to further look at the EEG, to understand the EEG, and how to come up with protocol prescriptions for neurofeedback, and also how to do report writing for your clients. All of this lead to certification with BCIA or IQCD. So if you are interested in getting board certified down the road, these courses are endorsed and are sanctioned by BCIA and IQCD, and some of the hours will count towards your certification. Again, if you talk to Kelly, he will guide you through the process himself, and he will explain the process from A to Z. Now, with that in mind, I want to thank again Mitch and Angelica for their support, and Rani for trying to help me solve the problem. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them right now.
Santiago, thank you so much. And I want to remind everybody, this is just part 1. Okay, so part 2 will be, I'll look up the date and put it in. I think I don't want to say it wrong. But wonderful stuff. I do want to ask about the FDA clearance. Is that with a specific device, or is it generally neurofeedback is FDA cleared?
Well, as of now, it's a specific device. I don't remember the name. I look for the article and share with everyone. But when the news came out, they didn't specify the amplifier itself. They talked about neurofeedback. So the research that was clear was with a specific amplifier. I don't remember which one it was. But I think it's good news for us in terms of neurofeedback being as a global term, as an intervention modality being embraced by the FDA, and hopefully it will follow for other conditions as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We certainly need that support.
It is great news and a good step forward for neurofeedback. If you all are making websites, just be real clear about getting your website information, any kind of promotion, any kind of advertising you do, that you're not misrepresenting something. Because just as this is a step forward, misrepresentation can give us a push backward.
So my question is for the training in San Antonio, does it have a certain, like I have B-Medic equipment and qEEg equipment. Do we bring our equipment if we wanted to go, or do you provide equipment, or can we bring our equipment? That's my question.
That's a very good question. We try to be as non-denominational as we can, but we work mainly with mid-star amplifiers and qEEg software for the recording and the analysis of the information. So if you're interested to bring your equipment, that's an option that you can discuss with Kelly, certainly, because he would be the one person to do that. But we typically tend to use mid-star amplifiers for the recording, and then I use qEEg for the interpretation. Now, if you have EEGs that you want to have us look at in class, we can certainly do that. You can bring them as EDF files, and then we can take a look at them that way as well.
First of all, thank you so much. This was so beautifully done. In my practice, I'm a psychoneurotherapist, and I always combine targeted nutritional therapy. I work with Celesco and neuroscience, and we just want to know the nutraceutical rather than pharmaceutical elements of the lack of nutrients in the brain. And I have realized that not until we have the right amino acid, minerals, the essential biochemicals, the brain may change, but it's not going to be lasting long. I wanted to know your opinion on it.
Yes, one of the things that I'm more involved in also working now is neuroinflammation, and I always endorse multidisciplinary approaches. In some of the presentations I do, and in some of the parts of the class in EEG, I cover neuroinflammation and how looking at endocrinological responses and nutrition approaches is very important. I think that decline is a combination of elements. Neurofeedback is the one element we bring to the equation, but of course, good nutrition is essential. So in the last part of my career, I never worked with a client who didn't want to do the whole approach. If a client told me, oh, I don't need the nutrition, I would say, then I'm sorry, I cannot work with you, because you need to, the 4 pillars, which are essential: nutrition, sleep. So now I work hand in hand with particularly functional medicine practitioners who I refer clients to and who refer clients to me. I refer them for all the lab testing, amino acids, neurochemicals, cytokines, inflammatory markers, neurotransmitters. They do that part. And I look at the EEG, and what I do is correlate the data. And there's really good correlates with data and nutrition. So it's very, very important. And what you're doing is essential. I think that more and more practitioners should embrace it, and not necessarily do it from the practice, but network with professionals who do it in their neck of the woods.
There's time. I would like to ask a relatively simple thing with that. With the example of the client that had the excess alpha at the T4, I think I saw that the protocol you used was a sequential CZ minus T4. Do you typically use sequential protocols? Would you ever do just a referential protocol at the T4, or what's your view about the difference between sequential and referential?
Thanks, Mitch. That's a very good question. In the first part of my career, I would only do monopolar referential montages. And then I started working with the one and only Jay Gunkelman, who many of us know. And once I started looking at EEGs with him and doing more mentoring, he explained to me the benefits of doing the sequential montages. So as of today, I preferably do the sequential bipolar montages. Every now and then, I may do a monopolar montage based on the client's EEG, their history, and a little bit of my gut instinct. But for the most part, I prefer the sequential because I think that you get more real estate coverage in brain activity. And compared to the monopolars, in my experience at least, it brings the regulation more quickly and more efficiently. Now, I know some colleagues who do 2-channel to 4 channels. To me, that's a lot to manhandle, and that's a lot of information to have to manage at the same time. So I try to stay away from those as much as I can. And I mean, again, in 16 years of doing this, what's worked for me is the bipolar. So I don't go on try and reinvent the wheel. But some cases will be different, and you know, they're outside the norm. You get the outliers, of course, and you work a little different with them.
Yeah, thank you. I think, yeah, I think some people, and I've not learned to be able to predict. Some people do respond better to the referential, and I don't know why, but yeah. So I might do the sequential bipolar, and if it's not getting me what I usually get, then I'll try a referential, and you never know. I mean, the brain's a funny thing, and then different brains are funny, and so okay. I appreciate your answer.
Certainly, thank you.
So folks, our time is up. Thank you for a lovely presentation, Santiago. I do want to remind you, join us again for part 2, July 16th at 7:30. You have to register again. Okay, so go ahead and sign up again. We'll look forward to seeing you, and again on the 11th with Harry Campbell. Have a good night, good morning,
Good night,
good
everybody.
day.
Thank you. Good to
Take
see
care,
you.
everybody. Bye-bye.